gradually, even as early as the 1800s, this enthusiasm begins to affect white congregations. As a matter of fact, in the 1800 revival, we began to see an exchange of singing between the slaves and the white Methodists and Baptists and Presbyterians. And this was the cause for an 1819 book by John Fanning Watson called The Methodist Era, where he chastises them for singing like those songs that were first composed in the colored community, he calls it. Not only were they frightened because it was new, they were frightened because it was different, and they were slightly angry because something that was so important to them, something that was so necessary to their own expression, had come from a group that really oughtn't to have had the sense to create this and to bring it.
Many of the slaves were convinced that the people who claimed to be Christians, who were slave masters, could only be one or the other. They couldn't be both. They would either have to be slave masters or they would be Christians. So they discounted their Christianity. In fact, Douglas says the worst of all the slave masters were the religious ones, because they would whip your butt and then go pray it off. You know, I'm sorry I whipped his butt, Lord. You understand what I mean? So the slaves early made that distinction between, you know, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. You see, that's what they're saying. You know, they never believed they were Christians, because they would say, how can you believe in God and do this to me?
We were taught that God did not favor the black man. God favored the European. We didn't believe it, and we expressed that disbelief in the music. So we said, pass me not, O gentle Savior. Hear my humble cry, while on others, in other words, while you're in the big house, as we were told that you were going to go, do not pass me by.
Pass me not, O gentle Savior. And while on others thou art calling, don't pass me. Don't pass me by.
And a lot of those songs that come out of the church are really meant to communicate a whole social life of the slaves that is more or less obscure to the masters. Throughout the 18th century, there was always that desire to go back. But by the 19th century, most of the slaves were native-born. They were American-born.
The majority of slaves were out in the field, and they would go out into what was called brush arbor. Now, this is where trees grow up and cross each other like this, and you have this pathway under. And it controls the sound so that they could get out there and sing and play. This was called the invisible church.
Margaret Walker, in her book Jubilee, has a very interesting tale about a slave preacher who, because he had learned to read and write, see, that was the danger that for the slave master, since he could read or write, he could write himself passes, and he would go from one plantation to another, and each plantation thought that he was owned by the other plantation, but actually they were holding church services. Also, it served as a form of communication. It was like the newspaper. Not only would you get communion with the Almighty, but reports on what was happening, and particularly 19th century as the whole intensification of the struggle against slavery, the whole appearance of abolitionists, black and white.
a white commander of a black regiment during the Civil War, has written a marvelous evocation of the singing of the spirituals by the black troops, particularly around the campsite at night, and how moving he found this music, which he also found to be strange and filled with a kind of pathos that was unlike any music that he had heard before.
Oh, nobody knows the trouble I see. Glory, hallelujah.
The slaves actually thought that this was created by God, you know, the Civil War, and that they were his people and they were going to be delivered. That's why they thought, and maybe also why they got tricked into believing that they were free after the Civil War.
I got a crowd up in the kingdom, and that good news. I got a crowd up in the kingdom, and that good news. I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus, and that good news, good news.
I got a harp up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? Ain't that good news? I got a harp up in the kingdom, ain't that good news? I'm gonna lay down this world, gonna shoulder up my cross,
Gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ain't that good news? Good news.
I gotta go up into the kingdom, ain't that good news?
Ain't that good news? I gotta go up in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
I'm gonna lay down all this world,
Gonna shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ain't that good news? Good news. I got a Savior in the kingdom, ain't that good news? I got a Savior in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
good news. I'm gonna lay down this world,
Gonna shoulder up my cross, gonna take it home to my Jesus. Ain't that
good news,
good news?
good news, good news, my
Ain't that good
good
news?
news, my Lord, ain't that good news?
During the time of the Civil War and immediately after the Civil War, most Americans had never heard black music. And when they did, they were stunned at how different and how effective and how powerful it was. And the Fisk Jubilee Singers were responsible for creating much of that.
The school was designed for the mulattoes, those children of the slave owners. They were the bastard children. And the blacks didn't accept them, neither did the whites. The fathers of these children wanted their black babies educated. So Fisk was one of the schools, one of the many, that was developed in the South that they could send their children. But they didn't have the finances to maintain the children after they left school in many instances, and while they were there, they needed support. So their singing, touring throughout the world, was how they raised money to save that school and to keep that school alive.
The Jubilee Singers went to Europe to sing before Queen Victoria, and she was so impressed with the Jubilee Singers that she summoned her court artist to paint the picture that we see behind us. And this is the portrait, the original Jubilee Singers.
A lot of times they were turned away from hotels whenever they wanted to go, and if they tried to board a train, sometimes they were not allowed to board the trains, or either they had to sit in segregated places. So they just had to put up with a lot of the segregation and the racism that was going on during that time.
The human spirit is a combination of passion and intellect. And the frontier religion of early America in the 18th and 19th century was as vibrant and as enthusiastic as our worship is today. But in the age of enlightenment, which was imported into the Americas and became the age of reason in the middle of the 19th century, the practice of religion became a mind trip and robbed the expression of religion in the majority community of its enthusiasm, and I think probably out of its activity. And that's why the white church, unfortunately, went along with slavery, went along with segregation, went along with lynching.
There was some great confusion at one time in the United States that if black people acted more like white people, they would be accepted more by white people. Of course, that was totally wrong. But for a long time, this is what they practiced, so that you attempted to sing without emotion. You attempted to sing without the dialect. You attempted to sing the same songs that they were singing at First Baptist Church downtown.
The Pentecostal movement emerges out of a slightly earlier movement called the Holiness Movement, which takes place in the late 19th century. And the Holiness Movement was a movement that stressed an experiential religion, suggesting critically that Baptists and Methodists and other evangelicals had perhaps grown a little cold, had grown a little bit formal, and that they needed to stress the old-time religion here, meaning experience, and particularly the experience of baptism with the Spirit, with all the gifts that come with that baptism.
One of the early songs was a song which the leader would sing, "I'm a soldier," and the congregation would say, "In the army of the Lord." The leader would come back, "I'm a soldier," the congregation, "in the army." Now these songs were for shouting, because with this new kind of speaking in tongues, they needed something joyous, and they'd sing, "I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, soldier in the army. I'm a sanctified soldier in the army of the Lord, sanctified soldier in the army." Well, you can see right away that this is going to be pretty infectious.
1, 2, 3, stand up. Ronald, good You don't really have to be a great soloist in order to get the song across. Talk to me. What am I saying to you? I have a mother who can sing "Jesus Keep Me Near the Cross." God knows my mother's not a great singer. But when she sings with what we call conviction. Gospel music is a feeling as well as a conviction. Come on, somebody. All right.
There is a mistaken notion abroad today when people hear the musical idiom of gospel. There's an overemphasis on the rhythm and the beat. The rhythm and the beat is secondary. What has made gospel live, authentic gospel, is the message that the rhythm and the beat carry.
Gates of pearl, streets of gold.
No. Do it again. I don't understand the words. All right? It's very important, soloists and choir members. It's so important when you begin to minister. Please listen to me, musicians and choir members. It's very important to understand that when you sing a gospel song, which is our heritage, we must be able to what? Pass it on. And the only way you can pass information on is two ways. That's verbalizing it or writing it. If you're going to verbalize it, it must be articulated in a way that what? People can understand it. Okay? Now you sound good, I just don't hear you. I don't understand you. Can you try once again? Musician, can y'all bring the music down? Okay? Stay right down there. Ready? Okay, let's try it again, please. 1, 2, solo, go.